We know that next year will be the anniversary of Beijing Plus 25, and we know the significant progress that has already been made, but we already know that there are many challenges that women still face since the first documentation following Beijing Plus 25. And I just wanted to highlight a few key messages that came out of the report, stressing the need for increased participation for women in the labor market, emphasizing the importance of equal access to decent work, fair wages, safe working conditions. It advocates for gender-responsive budgeting and public financial management to ensure resources are allocated effectively to support women's economic empowerment, and it promotes women's leadership in economic decision-making in both public and private sectors. And this was a key priority, and we recognize that in particular with today's theme. And there are many other aspects that have come out as a key theme from the report of Beijing Plus 25. And overall, it reaffirms the commitment to advancing women's economic agency and financial freedom as essential components of gender equality and sustainable development. It calls for concerted actions by governments, by businesses, by civil society to create an enabling environment for women's economic empowerment. Now, for us today, it's not just about empowerment, but it's also about creating agency. And we will hear agency a lot today, and we will start in particular with Dr. Hanan Morsi, who's the economist, chief economist, and deputy executive secretary at the Economic Commission for Africa. And we will start focusing at a macroeconomic level to discuss this issue of women's economic agency. Now, Hanan, you have been working so tirelessly, been part of advocating for the reform of the global financial infrastructure. And you've been really pushing for fairness towards African countries. But many argue that there are no ripple effects that are seen towards ordinary citizens. Why should people care about the reform of the global financial infrastructure, and what are the repercussions that we will see, or the impacts in particular for women and vulnerable groups, or those that have been previously excluded from economic participation?
Thank you.
Mike, please.
Hello. Okay, I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bahulu. I think let's start with why the inclusion of women overall is important. I mean, we know that it's important in terms of economic activity, as we've heard the inspiring earlier remarks. No bird can fly with one wing, so you need the two to be able to prosper. And it's important also because you need to address, and particularly talking, in places where you have very high inequality. You can have, it's not that you cannot grow when you have inequalities. You can grow, but it will not be sustainable. So part of addressing and gaining a sustainable growth is to ensure that all segments of the society are actually included, and of course at the heart, women. It's also important because it shapes the future of economic policy. We have heard before, men and women have different ways of leading. Actually diversity is important. when we talk, and there is a lot of documentation about that, including performance of women in boards. Let's go to where are we with financial inclusion of women? And what is very interesting is globally, African women represent 1 out of 4 female entrepreneurs worldwide, which is fantastic. However, that is not matched by access to finance for these women to be able to grow, to be able to create jobs, to be able to achieve the financial independence that we have just been talking about. And what is important here is to understand why is that the case. And there are, actually, it's one of the areas that I'm very passionate and worked on before. From the supply side, one of the most detrimental issues is the high cost, high interest rate that face women. Second one is the issue of collateral, very high collateral. And particularly for women, this becomes a deterrent because in a lot of time, you need, to have owned property, land, or certain type of assets that don't tend in African societies to be held by women. So all this, prevents from the supply side in terms of access to finance. So how does this, and I can talk about the other issues later, how does this relate to the global financial architecture? Because what we're trying to do, we're trying to reduce the cost of access to finance and make it available at scale for African countries, which mean that would trickle down to, to companies, to banks, to private sector, to individuals, including women.
Right.
So without addressing the core issue of the cost of finance for governments, you will not be able to access that because government access to finance for governments, they are perceived to have lower cost than individuals. Whatever you're gonna get will be above, there will be a risk premium above what the cost of finance to governments. And so that's one, and this is one of the issues that is needed, and we talked about how to do it, whether to have bigger and better multilateral development banks, to have some sort of guarantees to lower the cost. And here, this is one of the most interesting things that actually for women, evidence show that they are less likely to default on their loans.
Right.
So one of the things that you can do is actually encourage guarantees and first loss for banks to allow more access to women. But you need to have these instruments available.
I think we'll come back to that, especially because we have Mr. Chipuka here. But before we get to Chipuka, I want to go to Dr. Schrader. We've started with the global financial infrastructure, and I want to bring it to the national level. So if we're done reforming globally, what is it then that we need to look at nationally? And I want us to really dissect the national level because we've seen, even from the opening, what's happening in Kenya, saying that issues are with the IMF, but they are also with how things are being done nationally with the tax system. But without necessarily speaking to issues of Kenya or of Namibia, what are some of the failures that need to be addressed, the reforms that need to be dealt with nationally, and specifically with the experience of APRM, where you sit as the vice chairperson of the National Governing Council?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, for those who may not be familiar with what APRM really is. APRM is the African Peer Review Mechanism, which is basically a mutually agreed instrument, voluntary acceded by African countries within the AU framework and member states that basically move into a space of self-monitoring different mechanisms. These mechanisms, under these mechanisms, they are responsible for monitoring issues like government commitment in terms of good governance related to democracy, economic development, and the implementation of policies and programs, and looking at how best one can promote sustainable development. Now, coming back to your question in terms of how best one can look at reforms or addressing failures at national level, policy level in Namibia, several key factors that comes to mind when I listen to your question, and particularly when I listen to Dr. Annan as well, and that one can be reckoned with is, first of all, we need to look at, within the framework of democracy, within the African peer review mechanism, one needs to look at transparency and accountability. Basically, transparency and accountability, because we have to be transparent in our policy-making processes, predominantly because it is essential to address failures at national policy level, and this most of the time includes that we ensure that decision-making is made openly, it is made in a transparent manner, and stakeholders are involved in different types of mechanisms and can hold policymakers accountable in their actions. Also, I would like to add that you cannot only speak about policy making if you don't talk about capacity building. You need to talk about capacity building, because investment in the capacity of government institutions, in civil society, in organizations, this platform is a great example of not only capacity building but capacity development, because you need to influence systems, you need to infiltrate systems, you need to make sure that there's mentorship opportunities, programs, and so forth, which basically lead to evidence-based policies. Yeah. When we talk about evidence-based policies, we need to emphasize evidence-based policy making, because it is essential to ensure that policies are grounded in data as well as in research. We must have relevant data and research that lead us to certain policies, and we can utilize this data and ensure that it helps policymakers to make informed decisions, because making decisions without understanding what is happening on a national level, what is happening on the ground, what is happening in the different spheres of organizations and stakeholders is a futile exercise. Most importantly, stakeholder engagement. We need to be intentional about stakeholder engagement when we talk about reforms and when we talk about policies. Involving a wide range of stakeholders in the policy-making process, including civil society organizations that really has a strong voice, businesses, academia, of course the youth, human, all sectors within society is of critical importance, because it gives us the need that we wish to derive at. And then monitoring and evaluation. You cannot set up policies and talk about reform if we do not monitor what we are doing. Eventually, we will have to understand where we are going, what we are building our policies on, and what we would want to achieve. Anti-corruption measures, critical examples, long-term planning. We need to look at all these elements in order to ensure. So by reforming and looking at reform policies, these factors are steps that we can take, that we need to take, that is of critical importance, especially not only in Namibia, but throughout Africa, that can work towards improving its national policies, the landscape, and ensuring that we achieve the outcomes for its citizens. So, yes. So really, even if we look in the space of the financial sector, if we look in the space of the financial sector, we need to promote financial diversity and economic diversity. It is of critical importance when we talk about policy and reform. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Certainly a couple of thoughts here to follow up on, and I'll come back to you on that. Want to give Mr. Chipuka an opportunity to comment as one of the key stakeholders, as you rightfully pointed, that need to be engaged in policy making and in implementation of policy. And particularly because Beijing Plus 25 first report further highlighted the importance of women's access to financial services, including banking, credit, insurance, and financial inclusion is seen as a very key enabler for women's economic empowerment. And I wanted to know from your side, Mr. Chipuka, what is it that you're doing to deliver in these ambitions? What do you see as the role of the private sector in really driving the needed reforms and these ambitions? And are we any closer to attaining these ambitions?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm one of those men who ask, why am I invited? But, you know, it's when the politicians want you not to decline their invite, they write you a formal letter, because then you don't have a chance. So, yeah, thank you for the invite. I'm really excited to be here. Yes, I think number one, I am a father of two beautiful daughters. I'm a husband to a gender advocate, and I was raised by a single mother. So this issue is, for me, it's not just a professional one, but it's also personal. And therefore, throughout my whole professional career, I've been an advocate of equal opportunities, especially for women.
So you're a member of He for She. All right.
And especially I'm very passionate about the development of people, and I think throughout my life I've invested a lot in mentoring young people, but more specifically women who are today in senior positions in various sectors. I've also, I think, been very key in appointing women in key positions. Even when the critics and the doubters told me that I'm making a mistake. And trust me, they've gone out there to really perform, and they've actually shown that they are actually capable, in some cases even more capable than men. So that's me. So I think, I think the thing that we can do as a private sector that needs to happen, obviously, the private sector has a role to play. The private sector are the engine of growth in any economy. The private sector provides services. The private sector provides products, and the private sector also provides employment. And I think it starts with making sure that in our employment practices, that we are for policies that actually ensure that there is fairness and that there's equity in our policies in terms of how we recruit people. It's very easy when, I think, a typical organization, private sector, you find that at the overall organization will probably have about 60% women and 40% men. But as you get to the top, you'll see that that ratio becomes the other way around. So I think that's why it is important for us as a private sector to be deliberate, not only in appointing women or recruiting women, but also making sure that the environment that we create is such that women can actually excel to the top and become a member of the executive committee. And I'm here not just talking about, because I think it's also easy to just put women into non-core functions. I'm talking here of putting women in the core functions of institutions, because because it's easy to find a woman in a banking and put them in marketing, because not that marketing is not important, but because you almost like it's seen as it's not a core function. But it's one thing to put a woman in treasury, or put a woman into credit function, or put a woman into retail banking. So I think that's what we need to do to make sure that we do that. But I think overall, I think, we spoke about the, access to finances for women, and especially around the financial sector, and I think a lot can be said. I think a lot needs to be done to make sure that we have an environment that actually support. I think my colleague here spoke about the access to credit and the need for collateral that women don't necessarily have. But I think the private sector, and especially the banking sector, has gone a long way to come up with innovative solutions to try and support small businesses in general, but more specifically women-owned businesses. And that is through things like, I think there is partnership. As you know, the banking industry in general, it's funded by depositors' funds, and there's always a requirement to protect that, and it's regulated. But I think a number of banks are partnered with the DFIs to make sure that we are actually risk sharing, and therefore when a loan is guaranteed by a DFI, for example, a bank is able to extend without collateral, and then obviously that helps to make financing accessible to women in particular.
What is the current financial inclusion rate in Namibia?
So I think the last FinScope survey that we have, I think, is sitting at around 71%. Financial inclusion, but we believe that is, I think, is 2018. So we believe that number has actually quite increased substantially. But yeah, so there is a lot of effort that has gone into, especially, as you know, we used to talk about previously that education is the greatest equalizer. We're now talking about education and access to digital as the two greatest equalizers. And I think as a financial sector, there's been a lot of effort and investment made in digital capabilities or solutions, so that every single person, even including in rural area, can actually access financial services.
Yeah.
But obviously we need to play and collaborate with the likes of the network providers, because if there is no network in rural areas, for example, there's no way that obviously that service can be reached. And that's why a collaboration between the private sector, the government, in order to make sure that there is actually access to internet across the whole country. I think that's key.
I like that you brought in that digital aspect, because the last data I saw points to that only 47% of women in Namibia have access to digital services. So to your point, you're partnering with the Namibian government to do this. And now I want to know, to what extent does that partnership ensure that we will get closer to 90% in the next couple of years? See, I'm pushing you towards a target here. Earlier today we had Minister Theophilus. I think she left, but she made a pronouncement of 1,000 digital jobs by 2026. And I know I'm being a little difficult on you here, but what are we doing? 47%.
Yeah. No, and I think that's probably a fair reflection of the reality. And I think because even if you look at the banking sector in general, people that are digitally active, as we call it, they're probably in the region of about 50 to 60%. So the 47% is not sort of out of line in terms of the general population. So a number of things obviously are contributing factors in terms of digital access. The one is obviously that the connectivity across the whole country is not where it should be. So that's where I think government plus the mobile provider will play a role in making sure, and I know that and the mobile providers are investing a lot in making sure that actually throughout the whole country that there is access to that. The second thing obviously that plays a role is, even if that access is there, that access is not that cheap, right? So I think is to make sure that the cost of accessing the internet is reduced drastically, or in some cases even provided for free. Okay, so I think that's going to be a key in terms of increasing that number. Then obviously the third one is actually access to a device. whether it is a smartphone, whether it's a computer, which most people don't have, right?
Right.
So, and I think that's where, and I know the Ministry of ICT, for example, I do have these digital hubs across the whole country, et cetera, and I also know that the financial sector are trying to collaborate with the mobile providers to make sure that we actually make these devices accessible.
Yes.
Throughout the whole countries as well.
And you will certainly consider partnering with Minister Theophilus in her initiative that she announced this morning.
Definitely.
Okay, great.
Definitely, yes. Definitely. In fact, I have partnered with her before on the digital hubs.
Great. Now, Hanan, and I hope you don't mind I call you by name. We've been friends for a while. You have been working with the government of Namibia and several governments across the continent, and with Minister Theophilus on the nexus of gender and AI. And since we have ventured into this digital space, digitization now, I wanted to know specifically, how do you see the use of AI and digitization supporting access to finance, particularly for women, especially if we're saying that access to digital services for women in Namibia only sits at 47%?
Thank you. Of course, I think the issue of the cost and availability of access has just been talked about, but I think there are other elements where actually innovation and AI can play a big role, addressing actually the issue that I mentioned earlier about reducing the cost of borrowing and enhancing overall access to credit. So some of the things that can be done, of course, is using technology for digital finance. I think we are very proud that mobile banking actually originated in Africa and Kenya. Having access to payment systems, expanding digital banking overall, also in terms of supporting microfinance institutions to expand services to areas that lack access to finance and banks, addressing the issue of access. We have issues where branches tend to be concentrated in capitals or main cities. And hence, you have much lower access of finance in rural areas, for example. So digital solutions can actually tackle this to have, branchless banking. But also, there is a potential for innovative type of financing, where you can actually develop new products that serves the needs of women and entrepreneurs. And I'd like to, I think, just a very good example when we talk about collateral and the type of assets that women tend to have. One of the things, of course, we need to, if there are any regulatory issues on this, we need to tackle. But beyond this, there are other solutions. If women, instead of land and property, own gold and cattle, you can have mobile registries by which they can use these assets to actually borrow, use them as collateral. And it has been done.
Right.
So we need to think creatively to actually address the issues by new products. And we need, as a number of comments before, which I believe is very important, we need to address the issue of financial literacy. And let me tell you particularly why, and it relates to perhaps the other side I didn't mention, which is the demand side. In doing research on these issues, supply and demand, initial findings were showing that controlling for the same characteristics of those that apply to alone men and women, got the same level of credit. I was very surprised. I cannot tell you how many times I reran these regressions. And then, started investigating this. And it was very interesting because I was reading something completely different on sports, where women in races tend to put themselves in groups, in races that are lower than their abilities. So it started to dawn on me, you know, is it related to your sense of worthiness and want to be in the group where they are, you know, for sure they will, you know, they have to be almost sure that they're gonna be in the top of that group rather than put themselves actually in groups that maybe matches more of their actual capabilities. So there is an issue of selection out of that because of fear of failure, because of fear, you know, perception of lower creditworthiness than what it is. So here, the only way, and also plus social behaviors. I mean, let's face it, in schools, you know, girls are trained to, you know, always behave right. Men are accustomed to, you know, being known as being brave. So there is social norms that affect actually the perception or the risk-taking behavior.
Yeah.
So this can only be tackled through financial literacy and where all these technologies can help, you know, ensure access to a broader segment of women. So that would be really critical.
Yeah. So I was smiling because Hanan comes alive when she talks about regression models, because she is truly an economist by birth. And, you know, and sometimes she gets lost in regression models and forgets that she's not just talking to economists, but I really like it.
Only Bukulu can say that.
Dr. Betty Schrader, she mentioned innovative models, ways of thinking about dealing with collateral. And we are concerned about women as financial access and agency, but we are further concerned about young women's financial access. Now, I wanted to know what at the African Union you're thinking about, speaking particularly to youth employment initiative that you're doing in Namibia. What unique, innovative solutions are you looking at to deploy for employment and financial access here?
Is that now particularly to Namibia?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to appreciate the first part where Namibia actually, through the African peer review mechanism, as one of the countries that have really volunteered to this particular instrument, Namibia, through our late president, may his soul rest in peace, have done a targeted review on youth unemployment. And in this regard, what Namibia basically does, and in response to your question, is regarding youth unemployment, you know, initiatives. It's important to note that the implementation and specific details of initiatives has changed over time, and as we go into different types of assessments, reviews, and reports, we realize that even as the Honorable Ndaitwa said this morning, 71% of our people are young people. But in Namibia, there are several well-known youth employment initiatives that are aimed at addressing the challenges that are basically faced by young people, you know, in accessing jobs, building sustainable livelihoods, and for one of them, for example, and what has been done is, if we look at the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. This accelerator is a youth employment initiative in Namibia that works to bridge the gap between young people as well as job seekers in order to create employment opportunities. It also provides for skills training. It works for work readiness programs, partnering with different institutions in order to look at job placement services and see how best young people can enter the workforce. The second one that is personally one that I've really seen that is working in Namibia is the youth employment scheme, which is where this YES program in Namibia aims to provide young people, you know, with training and support to help them start different sorts of businesses and find employment. And in focusing on this, it helps them to move into a space of entrepreneurial development. It helps them to move into a space of skills training, into a space of going through mentorship programs, which is of course critical in order to ensure that young people really become economically independent.
Right.
So I think these are few of the examples that one can look at. You look at the Namibia Training Authority that also has a number of programs that it is investing on, and where young people are basically involved in. So within the scope of the African Union, we've been focusing on youth employment as a critical issue across Africa, and Namibia is no exception, because the youth are those ones that need to take over leadership, that need to be exposed, and that need to contribute to sustainable development.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schreider. I think that use of mentorship is quite important, and it should be coupled with sponsorship as well, that we also sponsor young people when we step in the rooms that they are not in, to ensure that they have access. Now, I would like to open up to a few questions. If you have any questions on any of the issues on regression models. No, I'm kidding. Any of the issues on how to unlock financial and economic agency for women, and in particular young women. But also, you know, I think we can also take this as an opportunity for further career guidance, because we have exceptional experts on this panel. So we have a hand here, and we have another one there. Please do introduce yourself. Thank you. Yes, the mic, please. Do you?
Unfortunately, we don't have a mic. We can share one quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Schreider.
Thank you. I'm Zama Ngobo, an attorney from South Africa. I'm the founder of WMN Attorneys, a law firm by women for women, and we specialize on delivering infrastructure and technology projects across Africa. I'm just going to take advantage of having men in the room and direct the question at Mr. Chipuka. You touched on putting women in core functions, and we also spoke about readiness programs and supports. As a man who believes in women, what do you think that men can do to support women once we're in these positions? I think Her Excellency alluded to how sometimes you think you're helping, but maybe the words that you use are disempowering. So just on a practical level, what do you think that men can do to be allies, and what do you think can be done at organizational level to support women once they've been appointed to leadership positions?
Thank you. Let's take the second one over there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Asante Onongo Katiti. I'm representing the Indigenous Research Institute. The Vice President mentioned that Africa should transition into a more value-based system, whereas we need to be cognizant of how we utilize our natural resources as well. And with indigenous women, especially, or indigenous peoples I believe across Africa, but also in Southern Africa, are ownership, so to speak, of natural resources, right? And especially for San women, it's like the plans such as the Hoodia plans and the Devil's Claw and things like that. I know South Africa had a case of fighting for the patent and the rights for the rooibos plant, for example. How can you perhaps advise indigenous communities and indigenous women to safeguard these indigenous resources? Because I know that a lot of the medication that we have actually has access to the indigenous plants that we have, but then how do we maximize and add value, especially through research? Because I know Dr. Schroeder was also speaking about research and development, and how can we empower the particular session so that Africa can actually benefit medicinally from indigenous resources as well?
Thank you. One last question, please, right here, lady in, I was going to say in pink, but but almost everybody is in pink.
Thank you. My name is Veronica Mangeni from
Veronica.
Kenya. I work with Women's Democracy Network, and our mission to inspire women to lead. And in some of the issues that I tackle personally, I'm an economist, and I use my knowledge just to empower the women in the grassroots. But the biggest issue is the financial muscle to participate in elections, because we know the men have the power. So I'm seeing in my country there is this other aspect that has come in where they are using the credit score as the collateral in lending. So how best can, especially the women who are already leaders, just support those at the grassroots level to ensure that your credit worthiness and score gives you an upper arm in ensuring that you get the finances just for the women to lead. And this is short term because, you know, elections are periodic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's start with you, Dr. Hanan, on that last question from a fellow economist. And I think it specifically relates to the innovative models of collateral that you mentioned.
So there are, I think, a couple of issues in response to this. One has to do with how do you establish credible track record. And here, you know, building, you know, credit type of credit history tracking, how on time you've been in paying your electricity, phone bills, and so on, your rent, and establishing that as a track record to ensure that your score on your credit worthiness is high. We have, in some countries, this have started, but I think also EPPRM, we've been working together with them on issues of having, you know, African credit rating agencies. These are some of the areas where that can help in having, you know, established data that can support and show evidence of women creditworthiness, which is usually actually, you know, with everything, with equal circumstances, women tend to do better in creditworthiness because they always, you know, pay bills on time and so on. Second is the issue of collateral that we just talked about. You know, this is about establishing a way by which you can register these type of collaterals. And this has been done, actually, including in some African countries, to establish this as a way to go beyond just fixed assets. In some cases, actually, it can include machinery. So some businesses may have machineries that are more valuable than the properties they're in. But because they were not being registered, that prevented them from using them as collateral. So having, you know, machinery, cattle, gold, and so on. And these are the type of things that, you know, policy-wise can be looked at. It's doable, but it needs these registries so that you have something to verify. Then you can take it to the lender, the banks, and they can use it accordingly. So I think that would be one of the areas that would be very important. But I wanted to also comment on one more thing that was said, which is about skills, because this is very important. When we're talking about all the evolution and moving to higher value added and, you know, for Africa to move more into green industries and all that. All this evolution and fourth industrial revolution will require upskilling and reskilling. And with the current divide, economic divide and skill divide and access to finance divide, if this is not addressed for women, the gap will only widen. So it's very important to tackle these issues now in terms of these skill and digital skills and other skills, so that we don't end up with more inequalities for women going forward.
All right. Mr. Chipu.
Yeah,
I just want to say we have 1 more minute.
Thank you. So yeah, the question was, what can men do to support women in leadership? I think that was the question. So yes, I think, there is a lot that what men can do, especially around, I think is creating that environment, that is conducive, that actually empowers women, that actually value diversity. Because so I think that is the first. So therefore, you've got to have policies that actually enable that and that encourages people to actually treat each one equally, but also is more specific and making sure that people that are marginalized, that they do have equal opportunity to excel. That's the one. And I think part of that is those policies are things like what I've seen. Often women get to middle management, and sometimes they need to take or make a decision between either taking care of a family or pursuing a career. And I think we need to make it easier for women not to have to choose. And that is things like flexible work environment, where a woman is allowed to actually work on flexibility. I've had before in my life where women worked only sort of half a day or 3/4 of a day, and obviously they get paid accordingly, but at least they are able to actually do and fulfill that role. So that's the one. The other thing is, obviously, if you are putting women, especially if they have not before led big teams, etc., is to make sure that you support them through coaching. So what I've always done in my career is to actually allocate coaches to my team, especially women who might not have been there before, and that really just helped them to build their confidence and so on. And I think the other thing is just to make sure that you not just say that policies and procedures and these things are not on your paper, but that you live it. Okay, that is actually when the behavior is there that is condescending or that is actually patronizing, that you need to call that behavior.
Right.
Because sometimes what we do is it allow these behaviors to continue in the boardroom, and it makes it unsafe for women. And I think as a man and as a leader, you need to call those behavior when they actually comes up,
Thank
and it's really just understanding, a few things. Because I remember having said in a meeting before, I said, let's not get emotional.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that how actually that statement in itself was actually patronizing, for women. So it's really being conscious and being aware of these things constantly. Thank you.
We are 1 more minute for you, Dr. Schreider.
Okay, just to respond to the question that has been posed by my sister, focusing on transition into a more value-based system in Africa and how we basically, safeguard natural plant products as well as looking at medicinal resources in terms of innovation and research and so forth. Actually a topic that I'm very passionate about, but seeing that we only have 1 minute, let me just drop this. Our patron for this event led Africa in 2010 when we had the negotiations on this particular matter that relates to genetic resources associated with traditional knowledge in Japan. And we successfully concluded negotiations while she has led us, and in that time mentoring people like myself. Now, in this process, we passed international treaty that basically had to be domesticated by different countries that acceded and rectified and signed up to this protocol. Africa is one of the continents that most of the countries, member states have signed up to this protocol. That gives us an indication that in terms of medicinal resources and how that can bring numerous benefits to the country, Africa is really, really, really at the core of that, because this looks at economic growth. It looks at economic growth because it safeguards our natural plant products. It looks at the value of medicinal plants. It ensures us to look at opportunities for growth at home strategies, and most importantly, to advance research and development in order to ensure that we can have innovative products that can contribute to sustainable development, poverty eradication, and economic empowerment. So this is one of the critical issues, and I really thank you for that question, because it's not only about cultural preservation, it really, really, really borders on the issue of developing and contributing to the economy of the country, and more particularly because women are on the forefront of implementing and taking these initiatives. If we look at marula oil, Zeminia, and those type of products, devil's claw, and so forth, women are at the forefront. And so I really appreciate that we are looking at these things holistically and understand that it's important that even when we speak about community empowerment and all those type of issues, stakeholder involvement, women empowerment, that we look at these issues in a more holistic fashion. So thank you very much for that pertinent question. Thank you.
You know, I too am very passionate about indigenous knowledge and indigenous products, and I wish I could respond. I'm a strong advocate, but we can talk about this offline. People are eyeballing me. And at this stage, I wish that we stand, and I would like to take your commitments for Nala, starting with you, Dr. Hanan, on, yeah.
Thank you. So,
Yes. They're playing us out. Yeah.
it's on demand free on gender discrimination to pledge to actually. For me, I commit to demand 3 on gender discrimination. I pledge to continue to work on ensuring equal access to opportunities for women across all areas, including access to finance, jobs, and others.
Thank you.
Thank you. For me, it's also demand 3. I commit to end gender discrimination. I commit to creating and foster an environment where women have the right to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For me, it's the 10th one that focuses on intergenerational leadership. And what I pledge is to create platforms for young women, girls, and youth in particular to continue benefiting from the wisdom of those who are ahead of us in order to form intentional connections for development and empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Boholo Joy Kinuendo, and I am Nala. I commit to pursuing reforms for economic agency for all women, young and old. Good morning, and good luck with the rest of the day.